Have all of you been to the West Webster Cemetery or have seen it?
Yes, yes.
So you know it's on the corner of Ridge Road and Maple Drive, and I got a picture of it. That's a current street picture from Google, just to give them credit. Turns out that West Webster Cemetery is the oldest cemetery in the town. There are some pictures of it in more detail. It's in your handouts too, but they're in black and white, so it's not nearly as pretty as these. You can see it from the air. It's a great aerial photo. It's not a rectangular parcel. It kind of looks like a backwards F almost when you look at it from the air in terms of its parcel description. Has a narrow bottom and then kind of slowly builds out to be much wider at the top in the north part. And then there's a road that bisects it there. That's how you get back into it. So it's a major part of the cemetery is through that road, which you can see here on this map, and I think it actually shows up in your handouts too. So if you want to get a really good idea what the cemetery looks like, though it's tempting just to look at it from the road, it's actually better to go into it because this one, there's more that you can't see than you can. So actually the earliest history of the cemetery goes way back to the Phelps and Gorham purchase. What I'm about to give you is information that's actually in Webster Through the Years, which is Esther Dunn's book. And that's the major source of information we have on the cemetery. She talks about it in there as having been a deeded property in the Phelps and Gorham purchase. It was actually Lot 17 in Township 14, which is Webster Section 7, and it was supposed to have been set aside for the purpose of a cemetery. I cannot find anything that actually corroborates that. I've now looked at 5 different Phelps and Gorham maps, all from slightly different drawings, because apparently they were redrawn fairly frequently as they were selling lots, and I can't find that specific lot in there, but I'm going to keep looking. But it makes sense because in many land grants and purchases, there were parcels set aside for cemeteries because they knew that people were going to have to use them for that purpose. So it kind of makes sense. It also makes sense because it's on the corner of 2 roads. You have Ridge Road and you have what was then called Cemetery Road, and that's another clue that it was actually called that before it was called Maple Drive. So you can. But this is one of the best maps I have of the Phelps and Gorham purchase. And the reason why I chose this particular one in your handouts is because it actually shows Irondequoit Bay in a much better formation. The other ones don't really either show it at all, or they show it as a tiny little river, which helps very difficult to locate Webster using those maps. So, the facts of the matter are that in 1790. In 1790, the was set aside for the purpose of a cemetery, and then after that point, it was situated there at the corner of Ridge and Maple, and then people started being buried there. It wasn't though incorporated until substantially later, which you'll see in a few minutes. Incorporation actually occurred not in 1790, but rather almost a century later. Hey, Holly. In 1878. And that's when the whole process started. The meetings of the lot owners were there. And I'm assuming up to that time, based on some prior knowledge I have of cemeteries, it was a very private cemetery without a full board, like we think about them now. And then there's the trustees that were elected. If you look at there, you can see some names that come right out at you of old, Webster names like Dickinson and Drake. All West Webster names, the trustees then elected John H. Drake as president, George E. Gates as vice president, Henry Givens as secretary, and Joseph Ketchum as treasurer. And those of you who are less familiar with West Webster, you probably are familiar with Drake's Landing, and the Drakes had a whole bunch of farms there, so there's a very common name over there. And one of the streets is named, Dickinson. So there's kind of a giveaway there. The cemetery was actually incorporated on April 12th, 1878, and its first bylaws were drawn up. I didn't put in this presentation, but they did have a revision of their bylaws in the 1930s, which is probably more realistically what they use today. The names on the incorporation papers were William Murphy, William Dickinson, F. Foote, A. Herman, there's another name, J. Wise, W. Turrell, and S. Drake. And then Sanford Drake, which I'm assuming was that S. Drake, was chosen later on that month as the first sexton. Now this is kind of interesting. At that time, It costs $2 to dig a grave from April 1st to December 1st, and $2.25, a whole quarter more, from December 1st to April 1st. And you know how much it costs now in 2022, according to their website? $800. I don't know what the rate of inflation is there, but it's a lot. It's a lot. So that's just some basic information about it. I don't know if any of you, it's not again in your presentation, but I don't know if any of you have any knowledge of the cemetery movements that occurred in the 19th century, a lot of the rural cemetery movements. One of the reasons they're called rural cemeteries is people started thinking about cemeteries not being the places to people be put off, which is kind of the Egyptian model, but more like a model of places where people could go to reflect. And those rural cemetery movement was actually one of the things that Olmsted did a lot with. And he looked at cemeteries as being places that were beautiful, that invited people. People would actually have, in Victorian times, would have picnics in cemeteries. And so it's interesting that this movement was, sort of incorporation, was occurring right around that type of era. And before that era, before those cemetery, they didn't really have associations per se, but rather most cemeteries were private, and many of them were family-oriented. And we even have some family-oriented family cemeteries in Webster on Harris Road. The one in the Village, the Robb Cemetery, which is a sign there that says Pioneer Cemetery, but it really is the old Robb Cemetery is what it was. And those were all really family plots that were then, some of them were growing very larger and turned into incorporated cemeteries. But the government also, New York State particularly, really wanted cemeteries to go in this direction, principally because what they were finding is these family lots, when they got into more urban areas, were often ignored. And there are some not so nice discussions about pigs digging up some of these family lots in Manhattan as Manhattan moved north. So that's the reason why they wanted some organization of people to take care of these cemeteries. So it's really interesting history if you ever want to read about it. So the cemetery did do some significant growth through the years. It was enlarged in 1844, in 1861, in 1871, in 1878, 1896, and then 1935. I have to say, because of this presentation, I actually learned how many rods are in an acre, which is nice because I never knew that before. There's 160 rods in an acre, and you'll see on here things like 1 acre and 20 rods were purchased. So, so you'll get some of that. So slowly but surely, the cemetery took on the shape that it has now. And now, if you look on the map, it's pretty landlocked. It's pretty locked in with all the development around it. There's a housing development to its west. There's houses on the street in front of it in Ridge Road, and then there's housing developments to the north behind it along Maple. So it's going to see it's kind of hard to see where it's going to go. Maybe there's something there, but it's been pretty hemmed in by the development in Webster at this point.
So how many acres is it now?
Right now, it is 5 acres and 18 rods.
And is there more?
Is there a definition of
graves
what a
available?
rod is?
There are some more, it says there are more graves available, yes. There's some, but it's in the northwest portion, it looks like, mostly.
Well, what is a rod?
A rod is a unit of measurement. So it's a square unit of measurement. So 18 of them would be about a little over a tenth of an acre. So if you want to think of it that way. Okay, but it might be a tenth of an acre, not in square formations, but rather just putting formations together too. It might have been parts of other properties that were ceded to the cemetery and sold to it. It does have a rather odd look because it kind of jags on the southern border.
We don't use that now.
I don't know. I've never heard anybody. My property's not in rods, so I don't know. Is yours?
No,
No, so I don't think
it's an
so.
old time.
Yeah, my house was built in 1890. It doesn't say anything about rods. There have been substantial improvements to the cemetery over time. There was a tool house built in 1904. In 1909, the fence you see there was built, and then there's been grading done at various times. They cited 1914 and 1924, but I suspect there were other times as well looking at the land there. In 1921, the vault was built, a well was drained, and a water system was installed in 1922. I would have to say that had something to do with the village, because the village system was awfully close to this. And the village would have brought its line down that way, so probably that's one of the reasons why they could connect into it. An arch was placed over the front entrance in 1931, and then trees and shrubs and other landscaping was placed in there at various times through its history. So it's gone through a lot of changes too, so what you see now might not have been exactly what someone would have seen a century ago, which is something to think about. don't have a lot of pictures that I was able to find in the cemetery in the past either, so people weren't taking a lot of pictures, or at least they haven't posted them online yet for me to get a hold of. And I'm not sure if Lynn has any, but we never got to talking about if there were any historical photos of the cemetery either. So. So here's some quick statistics about it. So this is an interesting controversy about the first person buried in the cemetery. There's one source that says the first child was a child of an N. Keynes, and then there's other material, and particularly an Esther Dunn book, that said it was Hannah Cook, who was the first wife of Ebenezer Cook, who was buried there. It's not clear which one it is. Either one of them would have been buried just before 1820, it looks like. So those are probably your two oldest graves that we can actually identify there. The total number of grave sites is about 4,300. The total burials is about 2808 at the point of this was I think 2018 figures. Grave sites they have for sale. So there's 409 at that time. They sold 1,008. And it says gravesite gravesite unusable, which I'm assuming means they've deteriorated or something, is 84. And you can see from this chart there's a lot of military veterans and veterans of different wars here, different conflicts that are buried in the cemetery. There are 36 Civil War veterans. There are 10 of the War of 1812. There's 4 from the Revolutionary War there, and then 137 from World War II. So there's a lot of personnel there. And I've seen flags there if you've ever gone past there on Memorial Day. So.
I got mixed up on the days and I went there to see Tom Pellet.
Oh, okay.
But which was yesterday, evidently. Right?
No, it's tomorrow.
Go back.
That's okay,
It's not
Pauline.
in one
It all blends
place
together,
it said
yesterday, today, and
17,
tomorrow, so.
And one said, the penny saver said the 19th.
Oh, no, the cemetery tour is tomorrow. Yeah, so you're close. Remember,
So then I thought, well, why don't I swing in here and see what's going on?
That's okay. Well, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did.
Who are you, by the way? What's your name? You look familiar.
Pauline Novick.
I've heard of your name.
Sailor? Carol Sailor?
No,
No.
I'm Priscilla
Okay.
Anderson, but I have seen you someplace.
Well, I'm a member, I've been a member here for many
Yeah.
years, and I've done stuff with
Yeah, she has.
the Baptist Church
Yep.
particularly.
She's our historian at the Baptist Church. So Pauline and I have been together for a while there, so. Yeah. So,
I have, my ex-husband had ancestors in Illinois, and they were
Oh.
evidently some of the first settlers in this particular area.
Mhm.
And when I went to do genealogy there, we met a man who was related.
Okay,
And he took us to graves up in a woods.
Yeah.
They, high ground, and it was woods, and it was all, and there were markers,
okay,
but
Wow.
it was like a family.
yes, yeah. Now, are there sites buried in this grave, in this cemetery in West Webster?
No,
No, okay.
no. Our family didn't live in Webster
Okay.
growing up. My ancestors from the
Right,
Civil
right.
War are buried in Mount Hope.
Okay, okay. All right.
Simon Harris is there. He's a young man. I go to St. Rita's Church.
Okay,
We always have a doings a couple times a year. Father takes all the people from church who have people buried there, and they go across the street and
oh, that's
pray.
excellent. I don't think anybody knew that, okay.
Yeah. And Simon Harris is a young boy. He was like 11 or 12, but died of cancer. I see Harris in here.
Yes,
So-
yeah, I didn't give you all the last names, I just gave you I didn't give you all the names, I just gave you
Yeah.
the last names of
Yeah, I see.
those who are buried at the cemetery.
Harris.
They have an excellent website, so if you ever want to just get on there and see who is buried, you can actually look at the website and see all the names and the burial plots of who they are. And again, I just isolated the last names, the family names here, but in each one of these, there's multiple people and many families that are buried there. For instance, the Cooks themselves, I think he's got 5, including himself. So you'll see, you can see from that list, and then you can kind of look down there and see if there's any family names you might recognize. Should you ever want to go in and take a look at some of the graves.
Can you use find a grave and
Yes.
locate?
Yeah, there's also the site Find a Grave, and it looks like it has access to those coordinates as well, so you can use that site as well.
Yeah, I know a man who does that.
Oh, okay.
Out in Ontario. And Tom had given me, when I became more involved with the Civil War stuff, gave me a list of all of the Civil War burials in Webster.
Ah, okay,
From the other cemeteries, there's the 4 cemeteries.
okay.
So I have that.
Okay. So, so like this is the next slide, which was just to give you a sense of the names. I know it's really small, and if anybody wants me to email this presentation to them, I'd be more than happy to do that. I'm also taping it. I hope it's taping okay, and I'll put it on our museum website, so people who couldn't be here today can actually see it as well, and I can actually append the presentation to that. So there's a tremendous number of family names, and many of them you will recognize. From here, including Drakes and Cooks and many others that are prominent in West Webster and in Webster itself. So you'll definitely see that if you take a quick look. Wait a minute. So if you want more information, I would suggest the website for the West Webster Cemetery. I gave you the just go to Google and type in West Webster Cemetery. It comes right up immediately. And then they have some tabs at the top that you can go to see different things. One of them you can see, it's kind of light here, it's even light in the presentation, is you can see their plot map of all the different plots that are there. It'll help you locate people when you go in there if you wanted to see a particular grave. But it is a really good site. It gives you some history, pretty much of what I just talked about here, but other factoids about the site and some beautiful pictures too, so that you can see what it looks like if you're not able to get there. Okay, so that was about it. I said when I started I wanted to make this as short as I could. I didn't want to keep you here long today. It's a beautiful day outside. But do you have any questions? Or before you do that, let me just let you know about the tour tomorrow. We are holding a cemetery tour tomorrow. I put it down at the bottom here. It is from 2 to 4 o'clock at the West Webster Cemetery. We have a number of people being different characters there. Kathy, what are you doing tomorrow?
I am celebrating Father's Day with my family.
Oh, okay. So Kathy's been helping us with all our publicity.
But everybody else.
But everybody else is there. Okay, sorry to put you on the spot.
I just did
Okay.
the publicity.
All right, but she's been doing all the publicity. It's been really great. But we have a lot of people there. They're doing different characters. Like I said, I'm doing Ebenezer Cook, who was one of the first settlers in Webster, and specifically in West Webster. And he was a blacksmith, and he was a tavern owner, so it was a really good, and the house he was in was still standing on Ridge Road, so it was a kind of a natural for me to kind of do some connections with people.
So when are you the tinsmith?
I'm not a tinsmith, I'm a blacksmith.
Blacksmith, well, okay.
Yes.
When?
Oh, tomorrow.
That's tomorrow,
Yeah,
at the cemetery.
Come and see me, yeah, because you're going to see Tom, right? Because Tom is doing a Civil War soldier. I'm
Yeah,
almost
he's
sure.
Brewer.
Tom is presenting information about Civil War soldiers in general, but he's standing by.
Brewer was the one, a picture in the
Yes,
Herald.
yes.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I wrote it, I just can't remember it.
I didn't know if it was related to Harry Brewer.
I don't know, but Tom will tell you. Tom Pellet is an extraordinary resource for Civil War soldiers in Webster, so he'll definitely give you a great overview of that. So we have a lot of people there. Just walk around the graves at your leisure, and then we'll step out and talk a little bit about our people. So
Well, when I pulled
we're gonna
into
all be in
St. Rita's
costume
where
too,
we were
so.
supposed to park, there was another car there, so
I'm sure you got it.
well, I messed this up.
Are you still gonna be able to come over tomorrow?
I might,
All right,
I
good.
would like to.
Okay, good. It shouldn't take-
There should be plenty of parking at St. Rita's
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Trying
We
to
got-
park on either of the streets won't work, they're just not built for
They're not-
parking.
yeah,
But
exactly.
St. Rita's is good.
But there'll be people there to make sure that to try to get you across the street and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So it shouldn't. You can take as long as you want. You can't stay the whole time, or you can't stay a long time. That's okay. So anyway, so I would encourage all of you to come and learn even more about the cemetery. It's one thing to have somebody talking to you about it. It's a whole other thing to have your feet on the ground and looking at it. You can see the parts of it, how it was laid out, where the older graves are. That's all kind of neat. So, are there any questions?
I got a comment or two.
Sure, go ahead.
If I can remember. I think you said the blacksmiths didn't wear gloves.
Yeah, I was reading back
That's
in the early
kinda
19th
surprising.
century. I looked at 2 articles online, and then I watched several YouTube videos just to make sure they were maybe correct. And they were saying that in general there wasn't a lot of glove wearing among blacksmiths in the early 19th century, and I was really surprised. But it also got me out of having to buy a pair of gloves. But I think, but it was really interesting, and they may have something to do with how they actually did the smithing. But they did wear aprons, nice thick leather aprons.
Yeah,
Right.
aprons.
I have I have some gloves I could loan you if you wanna wear them.
I wanna look authentic.
The other thing is-
I just gotta get my hands all calloused for tomorrow somehow.
The other thing is back then, they used asbestos a lot of times too.
Ah,
There wasn't a problem with that. In fact, I shouldn't reveal this, but in the West Webster Fire Department, when they had to cut a person out of a wrecked car, before they had the hearse tool,
yeah.
they'd cover the person up with a asbestos blanket.
Well, it's a great insulator, but.
But I mean, they didn't know about, you know,
Yeah.
Poisonous.
the different things then. But that's just one thing. The other thing is how much, the $800. Something might have been wrong about what you said. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think the $800 is to buy a grave site.
Oh, not to dig
And
it.
it's $200 to dig it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that for anybody
I'm
watching
not
online.
positive of
Okay.
this, but
That
that's what
might
I
be-
understand.
that might
I'm in
be
the
more
process
likely.
of buying some lots.
Okay, so it might be the purchase versus the digging. Okay,
Right.
got it.
Yeah.
So,
I guess you can dig your own then, right? And say,
yeah, exactly.
I do a lot of digging, I couldn't listen to my neighbors.
I don't know.
But it fill up with water before they put me in it.
Yeah. I don't know. That's something we could check on. It's a discount. But yeah, so, any other, you guys have any of you been to the cemetery before? Have any ancestors buried there?
Yes. Well, no ancestors, but I've been there.
Okay.
I went
I've
there
been
this
there for
summer.
several
Josie's
burials.
friend, Ray was buried there.
Okay,
It's interesting,
yeah.
if you go to that website,
me
it'll
too,
tell
it's
you,
safer than the
It
road.
you
does.
probably already know, the West Webster firemen
Yes.
that are there. It
There's
says
also-
so right on the website.
Yes, there's
I think
actually,
they've missed a few of them.
there's actually firemen there, exactly, yeah.
Right, but they're listed right on there.
So I found, so if any of you are familiar with the Fulton, New York website,
Let us know.
in that site, you can actually go there and you
So
can
that's
type
why I
in,
came here.
you know, type in keywords and get information out, and then articles in newspapers. So I went in and I typed West Webster Cemetery and wanted to see what I got out. And I got out 2,300 different articles that keyed on that particular name. So almost every one of them was someone being interred there. So you can just imagine, you know, the number of people and then the number of obituaries that are attached to those people. So I didn't have time to go through even a fraction of them, but that's another resource if you want to see who's there. And you can use that same technique to try to pare down those articles as well. So you want to see like West Webster firemen, you might be able to actually put that into. So and then kind of pare it down to where you're looking at particular obituaries. So
There's
I
a
would,
lot of cemeteries in Webster.
there are.
I'll have
Are
you
there
find it,
websites
I'll-
for the other cemeteries?
I think there are. I mean,
yeah.
there was for
Okay.
rural, there was for Union.
Yeah,
so
you can
this-
find burials
Yes,
and information about their military service and all kinds
Yeah.
of stuff.
It's a very, especially if people are looking for family history, it's a great tool.
God bless you.
So, you know, so it really is a good thing. And I know cemeteries, we kind of think of them as being sort of morbid places, but honestly, if you spend like an hour there just near it becomes kind of a different experience because they're really peaceful and they're actually kind of beautiful. So it's like, you know.
And very little traffic.
Well,
Yes.
they used to have picnics there on Memorial Day, and we still do
Oh.
the Civil War group, back the Civil War plot at the back of one area in Mount Hope. When we do a ceremony there on Memorial Day, oftentimes we will bring lunch,
Oh, there you go.
and that's what
Okay.
they did back in the day.
There's several names that I recognize.
There are.
The Drake name,
Yep.
I used to mow Mrs. Drake's lawn when I was about 12 years old. She was probably one of the farm was on Bay Road,
Yes.
overlooking like Glen Edith.
Yep.
And it was all grapes down there, like, it looked down in Naples now.
Wow.
The whole side of the hill there,
Wow.
it was all grapes back then.
Okay. Where was that? Was that located south of Glen Edith Drive or north?
South.
South? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, it's a good use for the hillside. You couldn't much use it for anything
Yeah.
else, I suppose, right? So.
But that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then Kaler was in there. I didn't know this Kaler, but it's probably, his son was probably Ed Kaler, who was a fire commissioner, and Diane Kaler was a fire chief before me,
Oh.
which would have been the
Okay.
great-grandson,
That's
maybe,
nice.
or
All right.
beyond. But I mean, a lot of names.
There's a lot of names. And like I said, I would encourage you to go to their website. You can look at the individual names, and then you can also do find a graves. And there's also Jen, I think it's Jen Webb. I can't remember exactly the name, but there's another.
Genealogy.
Yeah, it's like Webster Genealogy Association. They actually have a website that actually has individual names listed as well. So, so you can. There's a lot of resources out there to see more about the cemetery.
And both Mr. Cook and Mr. Drake were very, very early settlers, and they were interviewed by George Harris, who was a famous historian for this area.
Oh, did he ever live in the late late 1800s?
Early 1800s.
Early 1800s,
Yeah, when
okay.
just shortly after they arrived. So.
Okay, excellent. All right,
Thank
anybody
you.
else?
Well, thank you.
Thank you
Peter.
very
Thank you for
much.
coming.